Hi, author Joe Duran here. From early 2021 to early 2026, I wrote quite a few articles on trends in technocracy, and I compiled some books. And I thought it would be interesting to take one of my touchstone articles and feed it into Google's AI podcasting software. So I did that to come up with a podcast for the Unified Theory of Technocracy. And that's what you're about to listen to. And I'll probably end up doing this with some of my other touchstone articles. And I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for watching.
You think back to the early 1970s, almost 70% of Americans were comfortably middle class.
Right, a massive majority.
Exactly. But today, despite everyone having a literal supercomputer in their pocket and, access to the entire globe's knowledge and supposedly democratizing tools like crypto, that number has plummeted closer to 50%.
It's a really staggering drop when you put it like that.
Yeah, and it begs a pretty wild question. What if the technology that we all thought was freeing us was actually part of a deliberate architecture designed to make us obsolete?
I mean, that is a massive, incredibly heavy question to throw out there. And it completely flips the standard narrative of human progress totally on its head.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because today's deep dive is venturing into a really highly provocative essay that was published in June 2024 in the Trends Journal.
Right. The Unified Theory of Technocracy.
That's the one. And the author's mission here is nothing short of audacious. I mean, they are attempting to connect basically every seemingly chaotic crisis of our modern era into one thing.
Oh, yeah. Everything from AI taking over jobs to sweeping global climate mandates, strange economic shifts, endless foreign conflicts, all under one single unified umbrella.
Yeah. But before we jump into those connections, I think we really need to set some ground rules for this discussion.
I completely agree. It's absolutely crucial that we set the boundaries here because the text we are analyzing today is incredibly dense, it's controversial, and it wades into some deeply political viewpoints.
On both the left and the right, honestly.
Exactly, spanning both social and economic spectrums. It makes these massive sweeping claims about global health, institutional power, and basically the structure of society itself.
So to be perfectly clear to you listening right now, we are not here to take sides.
Right, we aren't endorsing the author's worldview at all.
No, and we aren't validating these claims as absolute truth either. Our mission is just to impartially decode the text for you.
Because whether you end up finding this framework, deeply illuminating or you view it as just an extreme conspiracy theory, understanding the architecture of the argument itself is vital.
It really acts as a sort of decoder ring for a major faction of modern anti-institutional thought.
Well said. So, to understand why someone might view the world this way, we have to look at the author's core thesis. They argue that a transhumanist elite is currently waging a deliberate technology-driven war against average humanity.
And the primary target standing right in the crosshairs of this alleged war is specifically the middle class.
Right.
But, why the middle class? To grasp that, the essay argues we first have to fundamentally redefine how we even think about the word power.
Because it's not just about who holds a political office or who has the most billions in a bank account.
No, the author defines power in a much more primal way.
Yeah, they describe it as the ability to actuate, mediate, and exert control over the aspects of the world that impinge on our continued existence.
Which is a mouthful.
It is, yeah. But in simple terms, it's basically the raw capacity to ensure your own survival and shape your environment. And the fundamental nature of this power, according to the text, is that it possesses a gravitational drive to preserve and grow itself.
Constantly growing, right, at the expense of everything else.
Yeah.
And the essay uses some honestly incredible pop culture touchstones to help you visualize this, starting with, of all things, J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings.
Yes. I love this part. The author points out that Tolkien wasn't just, writing a fun fantasy story about a villain named Sauron.
Right, it was deeper than that.
Way deeper. He was offering a really profound philosophical critique on the inescapable, corrupting nature of concentrated power. Like, the One Ring represents power consolidated into a singular source.
And in Tolkien's view, if power becomes that concentrated, it simply cannot be wielded for good.
Exactly. No matter the intentions of the person holding it, it will corrupt them. That's why the rings were originally forged to be dispersed, among elves, dwarves, and men.
To keep the power distributed so nobody had too much. And then they contrast that heavily with the Marvel universe. specifically Thanos trying to collect all the Infinity Stones to wield ultimate singular control.
Yeah, and the author brings up Stan Lee's famous line, right? With great power comes great responsibility.
But they frame that line as almost fatally optimistic.
They do. The author suggests Stan Lee was deeply aware of this underlying problem with power. Lee vested these godlike powers into superheroes who possess deep human flaws.
Like Peter Parker struggling to pay rent.
Right. Lee was basically creating a modern mythology to help us grapple with what happens when immense power is held by imperfect beings. But the essay argues that in the real world, relying on the quote-unquote responsibility of the powerful is just a losing gamble. Power inherently wants to dominate.
You know, reading through this section, a weird analogy actually came to mind.
Oh, yeah? What's that?
Well, if power is like gravity, like constantly trying to collapse in on itself into a single massive black hole, then systems of governance have to act like orbital velocity.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. Like you have to engineer enough lateral momentum to keep things balanced and prevent that total crushing collapse.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. And I mean, that concept of engineered orbital velocity is precisely what the American founders were attempting when they drafted the U.S. Constitution.
Because they were dealing with the cold reality of human nature, not just mythology.
Exactly. They intrinsically understood that power naturally wants to centralize, so they designed a system to deliberately bind power in chains.
By creating the three separate branches, right? The legislative, executive, and judicial.
Yes, they used the architecture of the government itself to force power to disperse, setting ambition against ambition. Each branch was designed to jealously guard its own authority against the other two.
But the essay points out a fascinating vulnerability even in that genius system.
Yeah, drawing on something called relationship theory. The premise here is that a triad like literally any group of three is inherently unstable.
I feel like I need a tangible example for that. Like, how does a group of three naturally break down?
Well, think about what happens when three friends decide to share an apartment, or even just three siblings playing together.
Oh, someone always gets left out.
Exactly. Almost inevitably, a 2-in-1 dynamic forms. Two of the roommates form a tighter bond, maybe over a shared grievance, and they isolate the third.
And the alliances might shift over time, right?
Yeah, maybe roommate A and B gang up on C today, and then tomorrow B and C gang up on A. But the triad itself is constantly trying to collapse into a dyad. The gravity of power wants to consolidate.
Which makes total sense of the literary reference the author makes next, bringing up George Orwell's 1984.
Right, the superstates.
Yeah, Orwell divided his dystopian world into three shifting superstates: Eurasia, Eastasia, and Oceania. And they are perpetually at war, constantly shifting alliances, always two against one, because a three-way balance of power is just unnatural to human dominance.
And even if it collapses into two, the drive of power is to eventually conquer the other and reduce down to just one. The author actually takes this even further, framing this gravitational struggle in stark theological terms.
Yeah, contrasting the Christian concept of the Trinity, where power is perfectly balanced, reconciled, and working in complete union, with what they describe as a satanic appetite.
A Luciferian drive that seeks to swallow all power, enslave all opposition, and leave only one single ruling entity.
So we have this incredibly deep mythological and philosophical foundation for how power operates. But how does this abstract theory actually manifest in the real world today?
Well, that's where we get into differing definitions of progress.
Because if you ask, like, just a normal person on the street what technological progress means, they'll likely say it means making human life better, curing disease, automating grueling labor, maybe increasing crop yields.
But the essay argues that the technocratic elites operating at the highest levels of global influence operate on a fundamentally different definition of progress. To them, natural humanity is not the ultimate beneficiary of technology.
We are viewed merely as a momentary, obsolete phase in the evolutionary flux of the universe. Yeah. Okay, the author brings up a specific real-world example here that I honestly have to push back on a little bit.
The Moderna quote.
Yeah, they quote Moderna, one of the pioneers of mRNA technology used in the COVID vaccines, describing their tech as a human operating system platform. And the author frames this as this horrifying admission of trying to build humans 2.0.
Right.
But hold on, isn't that phrase just like marketing jargon, like a metaphor companies use to simplify complex biology so investors give them funding? How does the author make the massive leap from a public health tool to some transhumanist godhood?
That is the exact friction point the essay relies on. What's fascinating here is how the author flat out refuses to view that phrasing as mere public relations.
I think it's literal.
Yes. In their framework, treating human biology as an operating system that can be patched, rewritten, and synthetically upgraded is the literal definition of transhumanism. The technocrats' ultimate goal, according to the text, is a transhuman symbiosis, where they merge with artificial intelligence and advanced genetics.
To transcend human limitations entirely, while average, natural humanity is just left behind in the dirt.
Precisely. And the author contrasts this technocratic obsession with the philosophical view championed by C.S. Lewis in his book, The Abolition of Man.
Oh, I love that book.
It's brilliant. Lewis argued that true progress must be about elevating our natural God-given potentials. Furthermore, he warned that when we talk about man's conquest of nature through science, what it usually translates to in practice is a few men using nature as an instrument to conquer all other men.
Wow. So the elites use technology not to lift the floor for everyone, but to build a ceiling that only they can break through.
That's the argument, yeah.
But wait, if technology is currently being weaponized against us, it wasn't always that way. The essay provides a historical timeline that acknowledges a period where tech actually helped the little guy.
It does. The author points to the period roughly between 1945 and 1970 as a kind of golden age for modern technology's impact on average humanity.
Even considering everything else happening in the mid-20th century.
Yes, and the author doesn't shy away from the horrors of that era. They acknowledge the devastating world wars and the rise of massive democides.
And for you listening who might be unfamiliar with that term, democide is when a government systematically murders its own citizens. Think Stalin's purges or Mao's Great Leap Forward.
Right, but despite those immense political tragedies, the actual technological innovations of that era, like the widespread use of nitrogen fertilizers, dramatically increasing global food supply.
Mass electrification.
Yes, and the discovery of antibiotics, all of that created a rising tide.
The physical conditions of life improved so dramatically that the middle class swelled massively, especially in the West.
Exactly. The sheer friction of basic survival was reduced, and that allowed average people to accumulate wealth, property, and, crucially, political leverage.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The essay pinpoints a specific moment when that rising tide reversed, and it's not the advent of the internet or smartphones. The author points directly to the early 1970s.
Yes. The author argues that the hijacking of the global monetary system marked the turning point in the war against the middle class.
Yeah.
Specifically, they point to the abandonment of the fractional gold standard and the rise of the petrodollar system.
I think we really need to slow down and explain the mechanics of that because it sounds like dry economic theory, right? But the author treats it as the inciting incident for the destruction of the middle class.
It's the linchpin of their argument.
Right. So what actually happened when we left the gold standard, and why did it hurt average people so much?
Well, when currency was tied to gold, there was a physical limit to how much money a government could print. The money supply was anchored to something tangible.
You couldn't just invent gold out of nowhere.
Exactly. So when governments severed that tie in the 1970s, moving to a purely fiat currency backed only by government decree, it allowed central banks to print money, essentially out of thin air.
And how does printing money transfer wealth upward?
Through inflation, which acts as a hidden tax. If you print trillions of new dollars, the dollars already in circulation lose their purchasing power.
Right. Your $20 suddenly buys way less.
Exactly. And the middle class relies primarily on cash savings and wage labor to survive. When inflation hits, their wages buy less food, less gas, less housing.
But the elites don't hold their wealth in cash.
No, they hold it in hard assets. Things like real estate, massive stock portfolios, corporations. When the money supply inflates, the nominal value of those assets skyrockets.
Wow.
So the system mathematically drains the purchasing power from the wages of the middle class and transfers it directly into the asset columns of the wealthy.
So they essentially figured out how to siphon the value of human labor without the laborers even noticing.
Precise.
And the data the essay provides to back up the real-world impact of this is honestly staggering. Like we mentioned at the start, in the early 1970s, nearly 70% of Americans economically qualified as middle class.
And today, despite 40 years of supposedly incredible innovation, despite personal computing, Web 2.0, the gig economy, infinite digital connectivity, that number has dropped to near 50%.
We hear the rich get richer all the time, but the essay is arguing something much more insidious. It's not just a byproduct of capitalism, it's a structural dismantling.
Yes.
But WHY, why does the elite specifically want to destroy the middle class?
Because the middle class is the only group with enough aggregate economic and political weight to serve as a counterbalance. Going back to your analogy from earlier, the middle class is the orbital velocity.
Oh, wow.
They are the only force capable of keeping the black hole of innate power from consuming everything. If you fracture and impoverish the middle class, you remove the only structural check on that concentrated power.
And the author quotes trend forecaster Gerald Celente here, who bluntly describes the intended outcome as a neo-feudal state he calls Slavelandia.
It's a bleak term, but it fits the framework perfectly.
So what does this all mean for the headlines you and I are reading today? If the goal is to crush the middle class and consolidate power, how is that actually being executed right now?
Well, the author categorizes our modern crises into several megatrends, framing them not as disparate, unlucky events, but as deliberate fronts in a coordinated assault.
They call the overarching strategy synthetic devolution, meaning the conditions of human life aren't degrading naturally, they are being artificially engineered to devolve.
Right. Let's look at their first example, generative artificial intelligence.
I can follow the logic on that one. Tech companies build a tool that can code, write, or generate art. That tool replaces a middle-class knowledge worker. The worker loses their income, and the tech company keeps the profit. That's a straight, logical line of wealth transfer.
Exactly.
But how on earth does the author connect that to climate policy? Because the environment seems like a completely unrelated bucket.
That is the exact leap the author asks the reader to make. Think about it. If AI successfully renders mass human labor obsolete, the elites suddenly have a massive problem.
Billions of unemployed people.
Billions of unemployed, frustrated people who still consume resources. How do you manage them? According to the essay, you use the carbon war.
Managing the population through climate mandates.
Yes. The text argues that ongoing climate emergencies are being leveraged as a pretext for radical degrowth policies. If carbon becomes the ultimate metric of sin, then controlling carbon means controlling every aspect of human life.
The author points to the push for digital carbon credits, right?
Yes, viewing them not as environmental tools, but as a literal leash. It restricts the mobility of the middle class, discourages procreation to lower the population, and herds people into heavily surveilled smart cities where resource consumption can be centrally throttled.
Okay, but implementing policies that drastic taking away cars, restricting travel, replacing jobs people wouldn't just vote for that. I mean, they'd revolt.
Which is why the author argues these transitions require massive catalysts. And that brings us to their views on the COVID era and what they term forever wars.
Basically, using crises to bypass normal democratic checks and balances.
Exactly. The text posits that regardless of the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic, the global response functioned to decimate small and medium businesses, which are the backbone of the middle class, while transferring unprecedented trillions into the hands of multinational tech and pharmaceutical conglomerates.
That wealth transfer was very real.
And furthermore, they argue endless proxy wars in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, or Asia serve a dual purpose. They drain national treasuries, enriching the defense sector, while deliberately eroding the stability of sovereign nations.
It's essentially the shock doctrine. Keep the population in a state of perpetual emergency so they accept conditions they normally never would.
Exactly.
And politically, where does this all culminate?
The essay points to Davos, the World Economic Forum, and the push for stakeholder capitalism.
Right.
This is framed as the quiet replacement of true representative democracy. Instead of citizens voting for leaders who dictate policy, unelected corporate boards, deep state bureaucracies, and global NGOs decide what is best for the stakeholders.
It formalizes oligarchic control, bypassing the ballot box entirely.
Yes. Now, if we connect this to the bigger picture, what the author is presenting is a chilling concept called the Great Reset. But they argue it's not just an economic reset, it's an evolutionary one.
That is the terrifying core of the Unified Theory of Technocracy, isn't it?
It really is. Historically, elites needed a massive peasant class to farm the fields, fight the wars, and run the factories. They preyed on the masses, sure, but they still needed them.
But now...
Now, the essay argues we are transitioning into an era where technologies like AI and robotics are so advanced that the elites simply don't need the rest of humanity anymore. They view the average person as an obsolete burden that needs to be managed, restricted, and eventually dispensed with.
So bringing this directly back to you, the listener, why does taking a deep dive into an essay this intense and controversial actually matter for your daily life?
It's a fair question.
Because whether you think this author has brilliantly uncovered a hidden global architecture, or you think this is a highly paranoid synthesis of totally unrelated events, understanding this framework provides you with a crucial lens.
It truly does. It illuminates the underlying psychology of modern skepticism.
Right. It explains exactly why so many people look at the rollout of new AI models, the enforcement of global health mandates, or the rhetoric out of international economic forums, not with optimism, but with deep existential dread.
They aren't just worried about a temporary recession or having to learn a new skill for their resume.
No, they are operating under the belief that they are being made evolutionarily obsolete by a system designed to discard them.
And that leads to a profound question. And it's the thought I wanted to leave you, the listener, to really grapple with today.
Go for it.
The author pointed to the early 1970s and the loss of the gold standard as the moment the middle class lost its structural leverage against the elite. Their power, grounded in the value of their physical labor and savings, was fundamentally hacked.
The rules of the game were rewritten while they were playing it.
So, as we look ahead to a future completely saturated by artificial intelligence, a technology that is explicitly designed to replicate, outpace, and replace human cognitive labor, what is the new gold standard for human value?
If AI renders our traditional economic output basically meaningless to the powers that be,
what unhackable, unsynthesizable leverage will the middle class need to discover? Because if power naturally wants to consolidate, and the middle class is currently sitting at 50% and dropping rapidly, they will need to find a completely new foundation of power to prevent themselves from sliding all the way to zero.